So today we are talking about boundaries in relationships and how to reduce our stress in them. Are you all ready to get started in this conversation? I am Sharice Josie. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a women's leadership coach, and I like to work with the high achieving women leaders. And that is because I feel like we all need a space to talk. We need a space to understand ourselves, our relationships, and just how we fit into this world. We are typically the go-to woman. But then where do we go and who do we go when we have questions, when we have answers? Or maybe we're just feeling unsettled and we don't know if it's a question, if it's a statement. We don't know where to put that, but we just know that we need something. This is what this space is created for. This is the audience that I like to talk to because I wanted to get some clarity. Okay, and so today we're going to talk about boundaries and relationships. So before we get started, let's just define what is a boundary. And this is a definition from Sharon Martin, and I like the definition. So a boundary is an imaginary line that separates you from me. It separates our physical needs, it separates our emotional needs, and it separates our responsibilities from ourselves from someone else. So that's what a boundary is. And so as we're living life, we need to understand, well, then how do I know that I need to implement a boundary? How do I know what it looks like? How do I know if a boundary's even been violated? And then what do I do about that? So first, how do you know that you need to implement a boundary? Well, that's when you feel an unrest and an imbalance. And sometimes as high achieving women leaders, we want to know what that unrest and imbalance is. We want to validate our experience before we do anything. But we really don't need to know the whole ins and outs to know that there's something that we need to do. We need to know that there's something that's all. Now you know that a boundary needs to be addressed, right? When there's an unrest and an imbalance. So when do you address a boundary? Do you address it now? Do you address it later? Or does it just depend? And I did a poll on my social media a while back asking this question, and I got such a variation of answers. Some people said you address a boundary right there when it happens. Some people say you address it later, and some people say, well, it depends. And my response is, all of that is true. It just really just depends on you. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the relationship. But one thing that is certain across whomever we're talking about, when you're implementing a boundary, you have to be consistent when you're implementing a boundary. What I mean by that is who you are and when you implement a boundary needs to be the same. Where no one is wondering like, well, why are you acting this way at this moment, but before or at another time, everything was fine. Right? You are being consistent. Maybe your consistency may look like when something is bothering me, I'm going to address it in the moment. Or when something is bothering me, I may address it an hour or two from now, but everyone who's close to me, who knows me, or who is in a relationship with me, whether that's professional or personal, they know that I'm going to address something that's bothering me. So people may say, I'm not sure when she's going to address it, but I know she's going to address it. That's consistency, and that's completely fine. So you cannot fluctuate who you are depending upon the person, the time, the place, the situation. You can't fluctuate. So if I'm being honest, then yes, maybe there are some times that we need to, hold on, let me flip this. There are some times that we need to address who we are, right? At work, I may adjust my tone, may address certain things, but one thing that is said across the board is that I'm not a passive person, that I'm direct, and that I will be clear about what's going on and what's needed, right? There's no room for misinterpretation. That's across the board. Now, people's experience of that may be a little bit different. It may shift a little bit different depending upon, but it's still going to be the same. So if we fluctuate in how we show up, it's because of how we determine the relationship should be. It's because we determine the relationship to be either a high risk relationship or we determine the relationship to be a lower risk relationship. Let me tell you what that means. A higher risk relationship is someone that you care about or a situation that you care about. So maybe I care about my relationship. I care about my boyfriend. I care about my husband. I care about I care about my job. Maybe not so much, but I need the job. So I'm more mindful about how I show up. So that's a higher risk relationship. So maybe a lower risk relationship is maybe someone or a situation that you don't really care too much about. So maybe it's a stranger, right? Social media is a good example of times where people don't care. They consider it a low risk relationship. And this is why you have those thumb bandits, right, on social media, because they can term, oh, I don't know who you are. You don't know who I am. I may not encounter you again. So it's a low risk relationship. So people can engage with little filter. Right? So how you show up may determine how you view the relationship. So as you're going through this and you're navigating relationships, I want you to understand and I want you to determine, how do I view this relationship? Do I view it as a high risk relationship, meaning it's a relationship that's important to me, or do I view it as a lower risk relationship, meaning doesn't have much bearing on my life, doesn't have much of a return depending on how I do things, right? And that matters. And I'm not saying whether one is right or wrong, but I just want you to notice these patterns. Do you trust yourself that you'll be able to handle the response? So this would depend upon if you put yourself into a higher risk relationship or a lower risk relationship. If it's a high risk relationship, some people may say, well, I don't want to say anything because it's a high risk relationship. I don't want to mess it up. I don't want them to think that I'm nagging. I don't want them to think that I have an attitude problem. So I maybe not want to say anything. If it's a lower risk relationship, you may not care, right? You may not care about how any of that happens or how you show up or what they think of you, because one, you may not see them anymore, or two, you have a plan B, or three, maybe it's something that's so important to you, like maybe it's your kid's education or how your child is being treated medically, physically, emotionally, educationally, all that stuff, where you're saying, you know what, I'm willing to take the risk. Right? And so that would determine how you show up, but you're still going to be consistent about whether you're going to address things or not, whether it's a high risk relationship or a low risk relationship. And sometimes some of the things that hold us back from that is you asking yourself, do I trust myself to deal with the other person's response of my actions? That's how sometimes we determine whether we're going to do a boundary or not. Do I trust myself to deal with the response of someone else's reaction? And that would determine how you show up. So if you don't trust yourself to deal with the person's response, so what do you think the first thing that you should address? One, whether you should do it, right? And then what is it about the response that has you fearful? Is it how you will be perceived? Because if so, that may not be your issue, right? Or is it maybe you fear their response because you don't want to come off as some certain type of way? But either way, you get to decide that. The other one is, do you fear that you're failing the person or the situation? If I put in this boundary, if I tell you no, if I tell you these are your limits, if I tell you that this is what we can do, what we can't do, then do you fear that someone will judge you because you have put in a boundary of the relationship or the situation? Because remember, you're the go-to person, right? So if you put in a boundary, maybe someone's not used to that, right? And you're worried, wait a minute, did I fail them? That might be something to get your confidence back of saying, you know what, maybe everything is just not something that's meant for me to do. The other one is, do you fear being judged? Do you fear being labeled? Do you fear that someone will say that you have an attitude problem or that you'll be misperceived? Honestly, especially as a Black woman, yes, that's a real fear. That's something that, we really care about sometimes, right? Sometimes as a defense, we might say, I don't care how they view me, and those types of things. But when it carries on in those situations where we do care, then it becomes a problem, right? And then we need to monitor that. So what I want you to think about when you're implementing a boundary and someone has a response to that boundary, I want you to think, am I mad at you for reminding me that I'm not taking care of myself? Sometimes when we implement a boundary and someone has a response that we don't like or we were shocked about, maybe we haven't been consistent this entire time. Maybe we have tried to present ourselves in ways that are just not authentic to who we are. And so when a person responds in a way that we don't like, Or maybe they're upset that we put in a boundary. We're like, wait a minute, this is the first time I've decided to take care of myself. And now you are giving me some pushback about that. Maybe thinking, I'm actually mad at you for reminding me that I have not taken care of myself, at least consistently, right? That I have not shown you or told you what I need. And honestly, that is in the workplace, that's in our personal lives. Are we letting people know what we need, whether verbally or just being consistent in our actions and our behaviors? If someone reminds you of that, then say, you know what? Thank you for the reminder. I need to get back to being consistent about who I am. So let's just talk about some ways to decrease stress in your relationship, and that we're implementing some boundaries, okay? So one is that you get to decide how your time is being used. You get to decide how much emotional energy is being put into one thing or another. How much emotional investment do you want to give something? You get to decide that. So if I'm at work, if I'm at my full-time job, I get to decide how much emotional time I want to give someone, whether they come into my office or I come into theirs. Right? If I'm coming to theirs and I'm talking a lot, I may catch myself and say, I think I've taken up a lot of their time. Or I may pick up on their body language, like maybe I'm taking up some of their time. Or I might just leave it up to them to say, hey, Sharice, I need to get some work done. And I get the same right if someone comes into my office. Right? When I'm at home, even with my kids or my husband, I get to decide how much emotional space that I can use. Yes, if my children are different ages, if they're a toddler, my time is not completely my own, right? But as my kids get older, then I get to say, hey, Mama needs some alone time, shut my door. These are things that you get to do while I'm having my time that I would like to have, right? The shows that I like, I promise you my kids do not like. But I'm like, this is my time. This is how I'm choosing to use this time. This is what you can do during this time. But I get to choose those things. Have I made it my job to approve or disprove a narrative? So this is another one. Have you made it your job to approve or disprove a narrative that maybe is not yours? Right? Maybe you don't have to prove anything. Maybe you don't have to prove that you're the angry black woman. Right? Maybe you don't have to prove that you don't have an attitude problem. Maybe you don't have to prove that, hey, I'm worthy and I'm not some mean, cold person that's difficult with social atmospheres. You don't have to prove or disprove that, right? But you do need to notice what is it that's coming up about you that's making you feel that you do need to, right? If that's something that's kind of a concern for you, then that's something that you need to work on. But that's internally and not external, and we get to know the difference and we get to do that differently. So when we talk about boundaries and we're talking about triggers, I want you to identify first, what is it about this person or this situation that triggers your mood or your behaviors? What is it about them? What did they say? What did they do? What was it that you're like, you know what? I feel like there's an imbalance. Remember we talked about the definition of a boundary? So there's an imbalance, right, that I'm feeling right now. And identify what is it that triggered that? Was it something in your body that shifted that? Did your mood shift? Maybe you're happier, maybe you're more irritated. I don't know, but you get to know like what was it that did that. You getting that clarity will help implement boundaries more consistently and over long term. The other thing that when you think about is what is your goal? What is your long-term goal? Is it to feel validated? Is it to argue? Honestly, arguing is some people's drug of choice. Some people enjoy arguing. If that's your thing, say, hey, this is a good time for me to argue, get my adrenaline pumping, and this is what I want to do. Okay, that's what you want to do. But also know that you would have to also deal with the consequences of arguing, because that does take up a lot of time and emotional energy. But again, that's some people's drug of choice. I'm not here to judge, right? But what's your end goal? What do you want to do? And then you get to focus on that, right? What do you want out of this situation? That's what you're focused on. We are not time wasters. And I say we, I mean high achieving women leaders. We don't want to waste our time. And if we are investing time, we want a good return on our investment of our time. Does that make sense? Right? So if so, it's like, what is it that I want? Is it just a process? Is it a feeling? Is it an actual tangible thing? I want you to decide that before we're kind of wasting all this emotional energy for no reason. And the other thing I want you to do is I want you to address your true feelings. I want you to understand what the feelings are. And maybe you don't have to necessarily put a name to it because maybe we're just not that in tuned in the moment of having the feelings. But maybe you might say, you know what? I'm having some grief here. I'm feeling upset right now. I'm feeling, you fill in the blank. And say, I don't know what I want to do with this feeling, but this is how I'm just going to take care of myself right now. I remember I used to call my husband when I had a really, really stressful job, and I'm say, hey, I'm just in a mood right now. Nothing specific. I just knew enough to know that I was in a mood. I said, when I get home, I'm going to take a shower, get something to eat, and I think I'm going to watch a show for at least an hour. He knows now, and then I have given myself, I've acknowledged what I needed, and I've said it out loud to someone who can support me. What the support I need is for you to take care of the kids, because I'm going to be out of pocket when I get home for at least an hour and a half, right? And so I'm saying what I need. So here's a bonus. Here's a bonus, and here's an extra, okay? For boundaries to work, you have to be consistent. For boundaries to work, you have to be consistent, meaning you cannot show up one way in certain situations and another way in another situation. Yes, we are complex people, so we do have different emotions, and yes, we respond differently in different situations because that's just who we are. We're complex, right? We have different experiences that show different parts of us. That's completely okay. But when I say that your boundaries need to be consistent, that means when something is bothering you, then you need to be a person to say when something is bothering you. You get to decide whether it's in the moment, if it's later, or if it depends. But what people do need to get from you is when something is bothering me, I'm going to let you know it's bothering me. I'm going to let you know how I feel about it, and then I'm going to let you know what I need. Yes, I want you to do all three parts. I want you to say what's going on. I want you to say how you feel, and then I want you to say what you need. Right? All of that will help to increase the boundaries in your relationship, decrease you feeling stressed and overwhelmed. And then your relationship is no longer guessing. You're not guessing, the person you're with not guessing. And when I say relationships, I mean all relationships, parent-child relationships, intimate relationships, your work relationship, all of that is that you are being consistent in who you are in these spaces. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give me a thumbs up. Would love to see that. Any comments, feel free to comment below. Click the subscribe button. We drop videos every Monday. And if you would love to work with me, look in the show notes, and there's different ways to work with me, and I would love to connect with you. All right, see you next time.